Good evening. Yeah. Well, tonight or this afternoon or whatever you want to choose, we're going to Melbourne. Yeah, it's not Melbourne, it's Melbourne. And but before we do, on the ride down, Canberra is in between Sydney and Melbourne, and I thought I'd just make a brief stop there because that's where we lived. Yeah. So just it's a beautiful city, Canberra. I wish my laser was working. You see out on that peninsula there used to be a hospital there. That's where my daughter was born. They destroyed it years ago. They imploded it and they put new buildings. So just wanted to drop by my university and just take a good look. This is where I did my doctoral work. And this is the school that I taught at most of the years that I was there. It was a Catholic girls' college. On the left was Sister Placid, who had the tenacity to hire me. Non-Catholic, male, long hair at the time. Went in for the interview. I said, I'm not going to get this job. And she said, can you teach my girls history? I said, yeah, I can do that. She said, you're hired. Anyway, and there's a group of them over. That's one of my the groups, the advanced class. Most of these ladies are now either doctors or lawyers or professors, and I still communicate with a number of them. And that was our house. Well, it didn't look like that when we bought it, but it's been redone. We built it, yeah, we had it built. When we had it built, when we came back in '83, we sold it for about $300?
No, 60,000.
60?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's on the market for $850. Anyway, so we just stopped there. So let's go on down to. I just did that for a bit of reminiscing. So Melbourne, it's the capital, most populous city of the state of Victoria. Okay, Sydney was in New South Wales. So this is in Victoria. Second most populous city in Australia, Sydney being the first. Population just over 5 million. So about 20% of the population of Australia lives in Melbourne. So if you put Melbourne and Sydney together, almost close to half of the entire country lives in those two cities. And if you add the other major cities, Brisbane, Adelaide, it really rockets up. So although we think of the images of Australia, the rural, it's really very cosmopolitan country. Yeah. So the city occupies the northeast coast of what's known as Port Phillip Bay. You can see the districts on the right, and then the various the areas on the right and the districts on the left, or is it the other way around? No, districts are on the right. The way I know that is by the football teams. Okay, they play for these various districts. And what's interesting in Melbourne, Sydney, they play out of clubs, and these clubs are basically big pubs, which have all sorts of activities, sponsor the football teams, and they all have lots of gambling. I think I mentioned last week, Australians love to gamble. That's how they paid for the Opera House, by buying into a lottery. Okay, in terms of climate, it's temperate ocean climate, characterized by warm summers, cool, damp winters. It's known for its variable weather. It's sometimes said you can have 4 seasons in one day. Things can change very quickly, and that's what in fact we experienced that in Canberra. You look out on the horizon, you say a change is coming, because you can see it coming toward you. It'll be beautiful and bright, and then suddenly there's going to be a change. And so it's got that aspect to its climate. That's due to the hot inland areas and then the colder ocean, and when the two come together, again, lots of variability. Annual rainfall 26 inches, so it's quite a bit less than Sydney, distributed throughout the year. October is usually the wettest month. January is the driest. Temperatures moderate. Very rarely does it get below freezing. Maximum temperatures vary from 55 in July to 79 in January. Now remember, the seasons are reversed. Okay? January is their summer, okay, where it's our winter. So that's your highest temperatures will be in December, January, February. You get a lot of winds off the ocean, and that actually keeps the city fairly pollution-free. You don't get much pollution in Melbourne. Okay, a little history. First British settlement in Victoria, which was then part of the New South Wales penal colony. Okay, initially, there was no Victoria. Okay, that will come later. But what we call Victoria now was established by Colonel David Collins in 1830 at a place called Sullivan Bay. The following year, because of the lack of resources, these guys left and they went to Van Diemen's Land. What's Van Diemen's Land today? Does anyone know what we call that? Tasmania. Tasmania. It was originally called Van Diemen's Land. And those settlers then founded the city of Hobart in Tasmania. It'd be another 30 years before another settlement was attempted. And this was in 1835 when John Batman, again, they came from Van Diemen's Land, explored the Melbourne area, and negotiated a purchase of 600,000 acres from the Aboriginal people that were there. 600,000 acres. He selected a site on the north bank of the Yarra River and then returned to Van Diemen's Land. Another group came, arrived in the area, and established a settlement that's now known as Melbourne. Batman and his group returned the following month, and the two groups came together, made a settlement, and their settlement was initially known as Dutigala, which is an Aboriginal term. So Batman had this treaty with the Aboriginals, but then the governor of New South Wales, Richard Bourke, decided to annul it, to annul the treaty, and he declared the city the administrative capital of the Port Phillip district. So it was one of those cases which we experience here in the U.S. of a treaty that was sort of kicked down the road or abandoned once the needs were seen. It's interesting that the settlement was at one time called Batmania, after Batman. But then in April of 1837, the British Prime Minister William Lamb, 2nd Viscount Melbourne, got the name. A lot of these cities, of course, there was Lord Sydney, there's Count Melbourne. These were all British higher-ups. So between 1836 and 1842, the Aboriginals were largely dispossessed of their land and driven inland. June of 1847, the Queen herself, Queen Victoria, wrote what is known as a letter of patent, which declared Melbourne to be a city. So Melbourne becomes a city in 1847 as a result of Victoria's letter of patent. And then on July of 1851, the Port Phillip district separated from New South Wales, become the colony of Victoria. Okay, so up until 1851, it was still part of New South Wales. 1851, it becomes Victoria, and Melbourne is now the capital of Victoria, just like Sydney is the capital of New South Wales. I think we mentioned this last time. Gold. 1851. There were some fields in New South Wales, but the big fields were in Victoria. And so Melbourne became the center of the gold rush. The population doubled within 2 years. I think I mentioned that last time. It drew a lot of people from Sydney coming down to make their fortune on the gold fields. So it grew from 25 to almost 50,000 in that short period of time. There was continual growth, and by 1865, Melbourne had overtaken Sydney as Australia's most populous city. With the wealth that the gold rush brought and the subsequent need for public buildings, a program of grand civic construction began. 1850s, 60s saw numerous buildings. We're going to visit a number of them on our tour. But just as one example, Parliament House. The gold rush was largely over by the late 1860s. Melbourne continued to grow as a result of becoming a major port for exporting agricultural products, especially wool. Australia, New Zealand are very much known for their wool, their sheep. Shame about the flies. Chris's parents came down. We were living in Canberra, and it was the summer. And the flies can get quite bad. And that's because Australia has no dung beetle. If you know, in Africa, there's the dung beetle, which buries the dung. If the dung sits up on the surface, flies go to it. So, in any case, he had a shirt with Australia with all the flies on it. But anyway, they began to develop a manufacturing center protected by high tariffs. And there was an extensive railway built into the countryside. So Melbourne's really beginning to expand as an economic city. The 1880s saw exponential growth because credit was easy. When credit is easy, you get growth. And so land prices had this and just went. Everyone was buying land, construction. It was one of those, but it's going to hit a what? A bubble. Those sort of periods always end up in bubbles. Remember the one we had here? Remember Japan had one too, where you could, remember, I think at one point, couldn't you borrow money here without even having to show you were working? Remember that? To buy a house? That's why all that, and then in 2008, it burst. And then everyone was collecting on, so that sort of thing happened. And but during this land boom, Melbourne became known as the richest city in the world. Richest city in the world, and the second largest after London in the British Empire. So it was, but then 1888, the banking crisis hits. And there was a great drop in the economy, but eventually Melbourne picked back up. This was an important day in the history of Australia, January 1st, 1901. This is when Australia became a federation. Up until this point, there were just the various states, colonies. There was New South Wales, there was Victoria, there was South Australia. They come together in 1901 and form a federation. So now the country of Australia. Melbourne was the initial capital. Remained so until 1927, when Canberra was built. And Canberra was built there was no Canberra at this time. The problem was Sydney wanted to be the capital. Melbourne wanted to be the capital. So they decided, we'll build a city in between the two. And that's what they did. And the architect was an American, Burley Griffin. And they had a big international contest. He won it. And we won't cover Canberra, unfortunately, but it's modeled very much like Washington, D.C. In any case, so that happened in 1901. During World War II, there were lots of GIs in the city. American GIs. And there was, as we'll see this happen in Brisbane too, there was conflict between the Australian troops and the American troops. Any guesses why? Women. Women won, and the Americans had a lot more money. And they tended to get treated better by people who wanted their money. So that led to conflict. There were a couple little skirmishes, but in any case, eventually it worked itself out. We'll see next week MacArthur eventually had his headquarters in Brisbane. Then there were immigrants flooding in, largely from southern Europe. So if you go to Melbourne, you find big Greek areas, you find Italian areas, as opposed to just Anglo-Saxon, British. So this was... Then in '56, the Olympics were held in Melbourne. First in the Southern Hemisphere, held in Melbourne. They were celebrated in November and December. Why? Because, so they wanted to, it's the summer games, right? So the summer down there, December and January. And then there is this famous match as part of that. The Russia-Hungary water polo. What had happened in 1956? The Russians had gone into Hungary. They invaded it. And so during the Olympic Games, when Hungary played Russia in water polo, it became quite vicious. There was blood in the pool. So, and that's what that Games is largely remembered for. During the 60s and 70s, there was mining booms, financial booms, and so we have major companies moving in and having their headquarters in Melbourne. BHP, Rio Tinto were two examples. Since the mid-1990s, Melbourne has maintained a significant population employment growth, international investment, and of all the major Australian cities, it was the worst hit by COVID. Yeah, they had a number of lockdowns. In fact, they were locked down 262 days. Can you remember the lockdown, what that meant? You didn't go out. Remember those first few days when it hit us? No one went anywhere. They had that experience for 200. That's how they tried to stop it. They focused on lockdown rather than vaccination when it came. And that proved to be a mistake. But in any case, it eventually recovered, and it's now the fastest growing capital city in Australia. It will probably overtake Sydney as the largest city by 2029. So in a few years, Melbourne will be number one in terms of population in Australia. Okay, the tour. Is this okay, Linda? We'll put you in the Crown Towers. Yeah. 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 There you get a nice view. Yeah. And it's got a nice pool if you want to take a morning swim. So we're gonna start at Flinders Street. Now, again, I don't have my pointer on this, doesn't work on this small. But do you see where the bottom red line is of the square, or the rectangle up there, or square? Flinders Street runs right along that line. It runs parallel. Can you see down the Yarra River? It says the Yarra River. So it's one of the most famous streets in Melbourne. And it's on the southern edge of what's known as the Hoddle Grid. That's the red. The red, is it a square? I can't quite tell. Which is downtown Melbourne. And what's wonderful about that is there's no traffic in there. Everything is provided by trolleys and buses. It's a grid. There's no cars in there. So and it's actually my son's favorite city. The street was named after Matthew Flanders, who was an explorer, who was erroneously credited with discovering Port Phillip. So they named the street after him, but he really didn't deserve it, I guess you can say. It was later research found that he had nothing to do with it. As the closest street to the river, it serviced Melbourne's original customs house. The original house was built in the 1840s, but there was a great increase in trade about the gold rush, so the Victorian government replaced it in 1854. So that building dates back to 1854. It was a noisy place. Can you see on the right? This is where if you had anything to trade, you had to go there to get your official stamp, etc. So it was a very busy place. Merchants, custom agents, paying in duties, etc. On busy days, up to 30 custom officers would be processing forms. So in 1965, the building became a museum. It's now an immigration museum. Flinders Street is also known for this beautiful railway station. There are some marvelous railway stations throughout the British Empire. India, Victoria Station, this Flinders Street station. It opened in 1854. It serves the entire metropolitan rail network. It's not just for trains going in between major cities. It services the entire metropolitan area. You can see a good example of its platforms stretch for more than 2 city blocks. These are interesting, these clocks. These clocks that are on top there, these are the original clocks dating back to the 1860s, giving the time that each platform is leaving. Right across the street is a very controversial building, and I think you'll see why. It's known as Federation Square, built in honor of the Federation that took place in 1901. It opened in 2002 to commemorate 100 years of Federation. The design was supported by artists, but was less popular with the public and led to quite a bit of controversy. It was just sort of over the top, and it didn't fit in with the traditional architecture. But anyway, we'll take a look inside. It's a venue for arts and culture, public events, and it covers about 8 acres. So it's a pretty big area. And it has 2 major cultural institutions within it. One is known as the Ian Potter Centre, which is an art gallery that houses the Australian part of the National Gallery of Victoria collection. It has 20,000 Australian artworks. So if you have a few hours and you're interested in Australian art, this is the place to come. Just a couple of... That's a very typical rural Australian scene. And it has all sorts of garments, and it's not just paintings. So again, it's got about 20,000 pieces of art, and this is just one of the smaller museums. There's also what is known as the Koori Heritage Trust. Now this is for Aboriginal culture. It has over 100,000 items in it. paintings, artifacts, books. So again, you can spend a lot of time in these two facilities within Federation Square if you're interested. And there's another. And lots of bars, lots of cafes. You're gonna, like I said, you're probably going to want to stop for a beer or two or three or what. In Australia, used to say you have the odd beer, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Australians are big beer drinkers. The thing is, if you go to, did I tell you this before? If you go to a pub, you don't go alone. You go with a group, which is usually called a school. And in those schools, since Australians are very democratic, everyone has to buy a beer. For everybody. So if you're in a school of 3, that means a minimum you're going to have is 3 beers. And if the first guy starts the second, what they call shout, then you're in for 6. That's how it goes. Yeah, the Australians love their beer. Melbourne's also known for its labyrinth of arcades off of Flinders. If you love shopping and museum, Melbourne's just great. There's a wonderful arcade off of Collins Street. It's called the Block Arcade. And like I said, that inner part of the city, that's how you get around. Trams take you everywhere. So it's a very nice inner city because you're not being cars and noise and pollution. So
that's the only city in Australia that didn't get rid of their.
Yeah, exactly.
What we would call a streetcar, I guess.
Yeah, I grew up in Glendale, and we had the red car. Went from Glendale to downtown LA. In what year? You notice all the red cars went away?
Yeah.
The automobile industry said no more red cars, and they started building freeways. And I think we sort of paid the price for that in terms of public transport over the years. You know, they've kept their inner city trams, and it's just a great way to get around. Now, this is, again, I don't have a pointer, but if you see up in the far right corner of the map, it says South Bank. It's a right corner. This is another very popular area of the city. It's known for its cafes, for its nightlife, its promenade. Really beautiful city. Again, cafes, bars, pubs. And then there's another arts center, which incorporates a range of theaters and is also the home of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Then there's something called the Eureka Tower. Would you like to live up there? No, it's a residential tower. Began construction in August of 2002. Completed in 2006. It was the world's tallest residential tower until, what do you think, what city outdid it? Dubai. Dubai. I think it's called the Ocean Heights building. Now this is residential. That's the main thing about this building. And it features a sky deck with a glass cube which projects about 10 feet out, and it's 980 feet above the ground. So you can walk out there and look down. Or it's not required. Okay, so just on east of South Bank are the Royal Botanical Gardens. Now, we saw the gardens in Sydney. These can just about match them. These are beautiful gardens founded in 1846. So once you've had your stroll down the promenade, stopped in at the Art Center, get a little picnic, come out to and sit down, have a few tinnies, and just enjoy the beautiful sight of this garden. It has 1.5 million, no, it has, 8,500 different species of plants in this one garden. It also has the National Herbarium. You know what a herbarium is? Herbarium is where they preserve various plants and algae and fungus, and they dry them, and then they put them on papers. It's one of the largest, and it's a very major center for botanical study in Australia. Okay, there are a number of other sites we're seeing, so let's take a look at some of these. Oh, there's the collect. That's what I was speaking of. See those on the right? Those are dried and then put on cardboard and collected. And I think that was the one that had close to 800,000 different samples. Okay. There's the National Gallery of Victoria. Look at that interior. And this gallery has art from all over the world. Okay, let's go over to the Victoria Barracks. This is on St. Kilda Road. I didn't put the map up there. It was one of the most impressive 19th century government buildings in Melbourne. Originally built as accommodation for British garrison troops. This is where the British troops stayed. It housed the Department of Defense from 1901, which was the Federation date, until 1958 when it was moved to Canberra. During World War II, it housed the Australian War Cabinet. So the Australian War Cabinet operated out of this building, the old barracks building. Then there's the old Melbourne Jail. That's the British spelling of jail, by the way, G-A-O-L. What do you think this was for? What are jails for? This is where they kept the hard convicts. Often, bushrangers who escaped from, let's say, Sydney were coming down into Victoria. This is where they were kept and executed. Some of Australia's most notorious criminals, including this guy. Has anyone ever heard of Ned Kelly? If you've been in Australia at all, you'll know good old Ned. He was a bushranger. What were bushrangers? These were bandits. So you think of the Old West. These were the outlaws who would rob coaches and things like that. He became a cultural hero. He's known as the Robin Hood of Australia because he robbed from the rich to give to the poor. So many of the working class people really identified with him. He eventually built a suit of armor to protect himself from the police. They finally caught him, and he was hanging in this jail. And there's a museum. If you like these sorts of things. the death mask. That's what they put on. At one time, Ned Kelly's skull was in this jail, but it was stolen in 1978, and they've never found it. So somebody's holding on to Ned's head, and eventually, I think every year it's more and more valuable. Then there's the University of Melbourne. This is one of the great Australian universities, established in 1853. To confer degrees in arts, medicine, law, and music. Foundation stone was laid in 1854. Classes commenced the next year with 3 professors and 16 students. First class. And only 4 graduated. Australian standards at universities are very high. When I was doing my degree down there, I was a teaching assistant and I was given a class. And my professor said, 1% will get A's, 1%. 5% will get B's, and the rest will get C's, and they'll be happy. To get an A means superior. I don't know if you've seen what's happened to our system, but to get anything less than, everybody gets A's. So anyway, it was a very high standard. And this is interesting. The admission of women in 1881, this woman, was seen as a feminist victory. And she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts. Became the first woman to graduate from an Australian university. Today, the university has bachelor degree options, undergraduates, 20 graduate schools, business school, medical school, music school, 5 research institutes. Started with 3 professors and 16 students. Beautiful grounds, beautiful grounds. Like a big park. Then we have St. Patrick's. This is a Catholic cathedral. It's the home of the Archbishop of the diocese. In 1848, this Augustinian friar, James Gould, was appointed the first bishop of Melbourne and the 4th Catholic bishop in Australia. The Catholic population came largely from immigrants from Ireland. A very strong Irish immigrant population in Australia. So he was negotiating with the government. He got 5 acres of land. And in 1851, the colonial secretary granted the site for the church. And that's the construction site. And since it's an Irish community, who do you think it was named after? And then there's the Melbourne Town Hall. This is in the middle of the central business district. It's not far from St. Patrick's. Now, we know Melbourne was officially incorporated as a town in 1842, but it didn't have a town hall until 1854. And the foundation stone was laid by Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh. In 1870 with a lavish ball. And then in 1910, and here we have a picture of it in 1910, a cinema event known as Soldiers of the Cross. premiered here. And it had an audience of about 4,000 people. So the real cinema in Melbourne was in the town hall. In 1925, a fire destroyed part of the hall and its main pipe organ. That's the original. It was rebuilt, and the main auditorium now includes this magnificent organ. I wish you were here. 147 ranks, 9,568 pipes. It's the largest, most comprehensive pipe organ in Australia. Guess who performed there in 1964? Can you remember that far back? There was a young group of British singers. The Beatles. The Beatles performed there in 1964. Outside, as you can see, there were 20,000 teenagers. I think they were all girls, screaming hysterically when the Beatles emerged. Do you remember that phenomenon? It happened here at the Bowl, at the Hollywood Bowl, when they performed. What's the first Beatles song you can remember? Yeah, I wanna hold you. Yeah. But such simple, kind of naive lyrics, but I want to hold your hand. Okay. Anyway, not far from the town center is this wonderful market. It's called Queen Victoria Market. It's colloquially known as the Queen Vic. On weekends, it is packed. There's a lot of people there all day, but on the weekends, it is really packed. Let's see if I have any information on it. It's been providing fresh produce shopping since 1878. It's been around. Today, you can find anything there. Food, clothing. Yeah, it's a whole day adventure just going to this. Okay, Melbourne's also known for its sporting venues. These include the Rod Laver Arena, which I'll get to in a moment, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and the Royal Melbourne Golf Club. Those are the three main. Okay. Who was Rod Laver? Great tennis player. It's located in Melbourne Park, the main venue for the Australian Open tennis, the first of the Grand Slam tennis events. It was completed in 1987 at a cost of $60 million, opened January 11th, 1988, for that year's Open. Originally, it was known as the National Tennis Centre at Flinders Park. Then its name changed in 1996 to Centre Court. And then January 16, 2000, to honor good old Rod, the three-time winner of the Open, they named the arena after him. Notice he's a lefty. The arena attracts about 1.5 million visitors each year. Then there's the good old MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. It's considered one of the world's great stadiums. It holds over 100,000 for any event. It's the largest stadium in the Southern Hemisphere, the 11th largest globally. It's also the second largest cricket ground by capacity. It's located just outside of the city center. You can walk from the city center so you don't have to worry about driving. You don't have to worry about parking. It's undergone numerous renovations over the years. Of course, it served as the major stadium for the 56 Olympics, as well as the 2006 Commonwealth Games. And it hosted the 2015 Cricket World Cup, which the Aussies won. This is the World Cup is all the major Commonwealth teams will come and play. So you have South Africa, you have New Zealand, you have India, you have Pakistan, you have England. Very big event. The Australians won it in 2015. But what the MCG is really known for is this strange game. Well, there's the field. I want to give you an idea of the field. It holds over 100,000 people. You might notice these strange sort of goalposts at the bottom. That's for this game. And this is the grand final of Australian rules football. Has anyone ever seen it on TV? It's a crazy game. A lot of kicking, but some real leapers. See this guy over here up in the air? Going up to catch the ball? Yeah, they really get off the ground. And I think I mentioned this last time. They're really known for their kicking. I think 4 NFL punters are come out of Australian rules football. Not only can they kick it far, they know how to make it spin and stop. So they're very much valued in the NFL. Yeah.
Brenda said, they don't wear any pads or anything?
No, you don't wear any pads. No. Rugby, we came back one year. What year was that, Chris, when we went? We went to the Rose Bowl with some friends. We brought some Australian friends with us. And we were sitting in this, and they said, what's all that? Why are they all covered up with all this stuff? Because in rugby, and then you just, but, and they don't have helmets, but they don't have the head injuries as a result, because you can't tackle with your head. In fact, early football didn't have the head injuries that it has now. The head injuries came with the helmet and the face mask. Because I can remember when I was in high school, they just started introducing the face mask. And I had a big one, and they taught you to tackle by putting that face mask right in the guy's chest, and that's how you would tackle. Boom. And so you were constantly hitting your head. Well, in rugby, you don't do that. You can lose an ear. Have you ever seen any of the rugby players often have their ears taped back? That's because they get in these scrums when the ball, and then they'll start trying to push the ball back, and if your ear's in the way, well, too bad. In any case, that's the MCG. And then there's this beautiful Royal Melbourne golf course. There are actually 2 major courses there, 2 18 holes. The West course is the elite course. If you ever watch golf on TV these weeks, you'll notice some of the announcers are Australian, and they'll often refer to the Melbourne courses. This is one of the top golf courses in the world. The club was founded in 1891. It's the oldest and continually existing golf club in Australia. Every little town will have its golf club. They'll have their golf club. And the Australian Open is held here every year. Okay, so finally, if you take a short night ride to the southern suburb of St. Kilda, you can see the St. Kilda Pier penguins. So can you see where St. Kilda is at the bottom there? On the right, on the left, right at the bottom right. That's St. Kilda. It's the suburbs. The first pier was built in 1853, rebuilt in 1855 as a public pier, and then a pavilion was added in 1904. And what they began to notice in about 1974, these little penguins would come up out of the ocean at nighttime, come up onto the pier area, and then at dawn they'd turn around and go back. So it became quite a tourist sight to go out and see these little penguins coming up and back. Okay, two areas outside of the city that are really worthwhile seeing. I mean, these are magnificent. One is called the Great Ocean Road, and the second is Grampians National Park. There's the Great Ocean Road. Now it's a long road. You can see the blue line, which starts right just south of the city, goes all the way down, around, and up. It's a National Heritage Site. It's 150 miles, so it's a long stretch along the southeast coast of Australia. Is built by returning soldiers between 1919 and 1932, and it's dedicated to them, and it's actually sometimes known as the world's largest war memorial. That's where it starts. And it goes along rainforests, beaches, limestone cliffs, really some beautiful geographic sites, which I'll show you now. Wouldn't be that a nice place to have a picnic? Yeah, that's all cut away. That's the sandstone that's been cut away over time by the ocean. Now, there are only 6. But the story goes, there used to be 12, but over time they've sort of been washed away. You can see probably 4. Well, on the top one you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the other end 5, and I think there's another one up here. Yeah, so this is that road, and every year there's a marathon that's run there. So if you're looking for a marathon, there you go. And then finally there's Grampians National Park. 413,000 acre park, 160 miles west of Melbourne. So you're going to have to travel a little bit to get there. It was proclaimed a national park July 1st, 1984, and put on the heritage list in December of 2006. It features a striking series of mountain ranges, and the sandstone that composed these high peaks was laid down from rivers probably 415 million years ago. And the sediment slowly accumulated to a depth of 4.3 miles. This is one of the famous sites. It's called the Balconies. A little close to the edge there. Now this area was also very popular with the Aboriginals, the Aboriginal people. Numerous caves have been found with a lot of Aboriginal art. And I think I mentioned last time, Aboriginal art generally expresses something known as the dream time. The dream time was a mythical time, a time before time, when everything was created. And all the various landscape that you see, especially mountains, special mountains like Ubaru, or what is sometimes known as Ayers Rock, these were talked about in the myths as at one time being creatures who then settled and became formations. And that's why the earth is so sacred to the Aboriginal people, because we might see something as a tree or a mountain, or they would see it as a spirit that is embodied there in the physical form. So it's called the dream time, and there have been numerous caves found in the area with Aboriginal rock art. Now these are thousands of years old.
You might want to mention too that the Australian government, recognizing that they were sacred sites to the Aborigines, then moved back to the people their areas.
Yes.
And so
Certainly.
Ayers Rock was renamed, well, not renamed, but went to the original name Uluru, and people used to climb it, and they no longer can do that.
Yeah. The Australian government has made a real effort in the last few decades to try and, what do you say, make up for some of the atrocities that were done. You know, in Tasmania, the Aboriginals were completely wiped out. Yeah, shot. And so there's been an attempt, and one of the attempts has been to give certain areas, sacred lands, back to control of Aboriginal councils. Now they have to operate within the Australian law, but they're usually given control. And like Chris was mentioned, Ayers Rock, which is Uluru in Aboriginal, is now under the control of an Aboriginal council. And at one time, tourists could go and climb it. I think you climbed it, didn't you? Yeah. But that you can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore because it's considered a sacred spot. In any case, here's just some examples. Yeah, the oldest piece of art they found is 17,000 years old. Okay, we're going to go back to the hotel. I've got dinner ready for you. In Australia, they call it dinner. Yeah, dinner. So we'll have a meal, take a sleep. You can sleep for a week, and then we're going to head to Brisbane. And like I said, I've also thrown in Cairns, which will mean that we'll be able to go to the Barrier Reef. So, in fact, if you want an Australian phrase, if something's over or complete, say, done like a dinner, mate. You're done like a dinner. I used to say that when I beat the guys at golf. You're done, Nate. Done like a dinner. Okay. Any thoughts, questions?
I was going to ask about the Flinders Ranges. The Flinders Ranges, where are they?
They're not in Victoria. They're up in Western Australia.
And they're named after Matthew Flinders
Yeah,
as well?
because he was an explorer. Yeah, there were a lot of, Australia is a big continent, and there were a lot of explorers who would head out into what they call the outback to try and map it. And there are stories of these guys getting lost and going in circles because the landscape was so flat and they couldn't tell where they were going. And yeah, a number of explorers died out in what is known as the outback. Yeah, the outback is everything that's sort of west of the major cities. And if you look at Australia, there's not much between, let's say, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth. In between there, it's pretty flat. pretty flat, pretty hot. There's in that movie, Gallipoli, I think I mentioned last time, there's this wonderful scene. Mel Gibson and this other guy, they've decided to go enlist to go to war. And they're going to Perth, and they're crossing this inner area of Australia. And they come across this old codger on a camel. And he asks them where they're going. He says, we're going to join the army. We're going to join the war. And the guy says, who are we fighting? He says, the Germans. He said, why? He said, the Germans want to take this place. He said, they can bloody well have it. So anyway, good time. We'll see you next Tuesday. Again, Cairns, Brisbane. Hey, question?
I have one question.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Catholic influence and the Irish, but didn't the Church of England come over too?
Oh yeah, the Church of England, of course, was the official church because that was the aristocracy. Yeah. And there for quite a while there was Catholic, Protestant, just like there was in this country.
And like there was in Ireland itself.
Yeah. I think that
friends that were German, so German Lutherans.
we came to migrate.
Some of the Germans left because of crazy King Ludwig.
Okay.
They went to.
Was there any one area they went to? Do you know?
Mostly Melbourne.
Melbourne, yeah. Yes, Melbourne was known for its not just its Anglo population, the Italian, Greek. Yeah, some of the great Greek restaurants, Italian restaurants are found in Melbourne, if you like food.
Now, the Aborigines, do they know the origin of them? Was it one time Australia hooked to some property?
Yeah, the theory is that the Australian Aboriginals migrated into Australia from Asia.
Yeah.
Probably, and they got to Asia, or some groups, from Africa. So what we think of the original Homo sapiens are from Africa, and then they spread. And one of the big migration groups went up into Asia, then down into the Australian area, and a lot of that area was you could cross it by land rather than sea. Yeah, there were land bridges, they figured. Yeah.
And the Maori from New Zealand.
The Maori people, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, see you next time.